Oh, thank you so very, very much for joining us tonight. I get the pleasure of introducing Connie. I am Lori Freudenberg. I am the program coordinator at Our Lady of the Prairie Retreat. And Connie is a former board member and longtime friend of Our Lady of the Prairie Retreat and the author of several books on Iowa's natural history and environmental problems. We're excited that she's going to share her latest one with us tonight, Tending Iowa's Land, Pathways to a Sustainable Future. She lives with her husband in an oak woodland near Iowa City, which they are restoring to its native biodiversity and health. And until her recent retirement, Connie was a senior science writer at the University of Iowa's IIHR Hydroscience and Engineering Laboratory. So
Yeah.
I could ask each of you to mute yourself. So we're going to turn the floor over to Connie, and then she'll take questions after she's done speaking. So thank you so much for everybody. Connie, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, well, just 5 minutes ago, I was gobbling down my lettuce with chicken on top. So this is a quick transition here. You did a good job, Lori. People, you're welcome to mute yourselves, but there are so few. My biggest regret is that we're just not sitting around a table in a room someplace together. And I'd like to make this kind of relaxed and have you ask questions, tell me what you want, more information, less information. When I was preparing this yesterday, my thought was that there were so many things I could do. This is a broad book. By the way, I had hoped it would be published by now. Its release date is December 12th. But what I will do is make sure that each of you get a flyer from the University of Iowa Press, the publisher, which will allow you to order it with a discount. That's the best I can do. So we'll make sure. Yeah, and Lori, do you think you would be able, if I send the flyer to you, could you just forward it to everybody? The 5 people?
Absolutely.
That
Yeah.
would be helpful. That would, because I know that'll be a busy time. So anyway, where was I? I was thinking that I could talk about, just do a reading from the book, and that's always fun to do, and especially this time of the day, because I think we're probably all readers if we tuned into this, and we love the idea of somebody reading to us. I do. Or I could talk just about the environmental problems, because this book covers the major environmental problems that we have. It covers 4 sections in the book: the problems with soils, with water, with climate, that is climate change, and what's happened just because we've lost so much of our native biodiversity. 4 sections. And basically those changes in each of those have defined the environmental problems that we're working with today. I mean, that we all know that Iowa's water pollution is horrendous. It's because of the conversion from the prairie to the, and the kind of farming that we do too, but away from the prairie. The prairies had, I won't say pure water, but crystalline water, clean water for the most part. And the like, they bred soils instead of eroding them. Or I could talk about how I did the book, because the book is an edited book and it has, I think, 28 authors. So finding those authors and then getting what I wanted them to do. This was a very hands-on editing job, extremely. I had a real feeling of what I wanted these people to do. I didn't want to just say, I need an introduction, I need a chapter on flooding in Iowa. I wanted them to write it a certain way and at a certain level to fulfill what I felt was the need. So one of the things that prompted me to write this book was just being at the university for decades and realizing that I had teachers say to me many times that when they taught environmental classes, they didn't have, they couldn't teach classes about the problems in Iowa. We didn't have a textbook on what was happening with Iowa water. I mean, lots of research articles, sure, but not something written for the student. And so I thought, wow, if I could somehow manage to get discussions at the right level, which is kind of a college level, I feel like that's also a nice, easy level for the lay public to read, something you don't have to think too hard, but you still learn something while doing the reading. That was what I was aiming for, and to just inspire students to learn about these problems, to care about them, and to do something about them, because we all know that we have huge environmental problems now, and I'm sure that if you cared enough to sign up for this talk tonight, you have had periods where you've gotten discouraged about what's happening to our environment, and at times the lack of response, the lack of proper response. I certainly have. So, the best antidote to feeling hopeless, I think, is action. And so I'm always, when I speak to college classes and the like, I'm always aiming to encourage them to act, partly because we need their actions, partly because that's the only way that they're going to keep going without getting upset about this stuff. It's for them. It's good for them. It's also good for our world. It's good for everything. So anyway, I spend a lot of time thinking. In fact, I was thinking about this book since my last book came out in 2016. And I think in 2017, I started thinking about putting this all together, all the stuff I had learned with my past several books. I had one book on natural history of Iowa, one book on flooding in Iowa, one book on climate change, not one book on soils. I'm certainly not a soils expert, but a friend of mine has just last year put out an excellent book on Iowa soils. And then I had spent years, the last decade, with those books coming out from 2008 to 2018. I was thinking about this book. Every time I gave a talk and a new book had come out, it was like adding one layer on top. So with the Emerald Horizon, which is the natural history book, I talked about natural history, and then 2 years later I did a book on flooding, so I talked about natural history and flooding, and so it went. So I felt that I had a commitment, a necessity to share that synthetic knowledge with students and with readers. The truth is that I know a lot of people who know so much about Iowa, and they're wonderful naturalists, but very few people who have put it all together into one picture. And I felt that I had been forced to do that through my writing and speaking. So these are the reasons that I did it, because I needed to get that out. I'm getting old myself, and I really want to retire and step back more from the academic life. And I knew that the textbook was necessary, and I knew that all of these problems are getting worse and really reaching a tipping point. And so I just thought, boy, I got to get that out. So that's why I did the book. And so I want you to ask me questions about any of those things, readings and specific things, anything about the problems or about how I did the book. So, and if you want to turn on your speakers and interrupt me, you're welcome to. But what I will do now is pretend that I'm in a bookstore doing a reading to you, and I do have a set of readings here planned that will give you a picture of the book, and I think also of the kinds of things that I was encouraging in the book. So let me say one thing that I wouldn't say in the bookstore, which is, I assume that since this was being done through Our Lady of the Prairie Retreat, that all of us that are listening are Christians. And I will say that I see my writing very much as part of my Christian mission. I feel very strongly that God gave each of us skills when we were born, and it's our duty to use those skills, however we're going to do it. If it means going out and planting one flower in our lifetime, well, then do it, and then you've done your God-given duty, or whatever you want to call it. I think that mine from youth has been observing nature. I love nature. I have a passion for nature. I came from a family that loved nature. And then also a family that loved words. My mother loved to read to us, so did my dad. My mother was an English major, my dad was a scientist. And so that joint love of words and love of ideas, especially about nature, I think have come out in my career. And I feel I do a lot of praying when I do my writing. I ask that God give me the wisdom to express ideas in ways that people will listen and follow more closely in God's paths. So that's me. And that's what I would not say at a bookstore. So I said this was an edited book with 28 authors. The book itself has 4 sections, each section dealing with one of those 4 major problems. It starts with the soils, and then it goes to water, then it goes to air, which is climate change. And then at the end is the discussion of loss of biodiversity. Even though these problems really started with the loss of biodiversity, I felt that people needed to go from the simple to the more complex in order to understand the problems. So what I'm going to do tonight is read a little bit. I don't know if any of you are a tinker with writing, but one idea that I always love and I try to do with my books is to bookend them. You know, you have this content that you put in the middle, and then you put a beginning and a closing on it that are like putting the shelves, the book holders up in a book, and you have your ideas in the book, and they're held together by the introduction and by the closing. So the introduction talks a little bit about how I wrote the book and why I wrote the book. But then there's a chapter that's called, what is it called? Which I wrote, Iowa's Life and Land, A Brief History. And this is what I felt I had been putting together in my talks of the last decade or 15 years. It talks about what Iowa was like when this was a prairie landscape. And the first big section in that really says, okay, go back to Iowa, early 1830s. This landscape is about to become the most rapid and complete transformation in the history of the world, because that's what Iowa was. I think now we're getting huge transformations everywhere, but Iowa certainly was the placeholder for rapid and complete landscape transformation. And imagine what that would have been like the day before the settlers first came across the Mississippi River. And then I just tried to write, what were the organisms doing? What were the sounds? What were the smells? And give a picture of that. And then go chronologically through the history of development. And if you look at it, the chunks of development fall out so incredibly nicely. From the 1830s to 1900, you have this prairie being broken with horses, and then and that was the loss of biological diversity. Everything was plowed up and the big animals were killed. Then 1900 to 1950 was transfer from muscle power to fossil fuel power, and that was the beginning of climate change here in Iowa. We have agriculture now produces 9% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, so carbon dioxide. So that switch was made 1900 to 1950. And by 1950, we were just smack on spot for rushing into industrial agriculture, which is what we've done from 1950 to the present. The use of nitrate fertilizer started when the nitrates that had been used in weapons in World War II were transformed into fertilizers. We had these big nitrates plants, and what were we going to do with them? Well, we were going to make fertilizer with them. So there you go to the nitrate fertilizer, which has caused a lot of our nitrogen pollution, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico and the like. And we were on the cusp also of having synthetic chemicals to control life, to herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, all of which are used in agriculture quite a bit, and the technologies for going to confinement buildings and the like. That's what happened from 1950 to the present. So I kind of go through all those, and that's what that first chapter is about. And then go right into the 4 chunks. So one of the things that I learned working on this book was patience with myself, which, as we all know, I think, we like to think we're old and wise enough to have patience with ourselves, but it still is tough. It took me probably 2/3 of the book to really know what I was doing and to be able to say for sure to the authors, this is what I want you to do, please, and this is why. And that's because a book it's kind of develops organically, it comes from this big creative mass in your head where you just have this kind of picture of what you want to get out there through words to a product of 100,000 words or less. My goal was about 80,000 words. That was on my book contract that encapsulate all of these swirling, changing, evolving ideas and brings them into something where the ideas and the chapters are concrete and relate to one another. So it's not an amorphous mess. And, not all edited books are like that. A lot of times edited books are just essays or chapters that go in and they don't have connections to each other. I didn't want that because I think we need to know about Iowa's problems, but we also need to know that how interconnected they all are. They're really interconnected. So, it's like this big web of interconnections where one problem both creates another problem, but also solves another problem. And they're all changing at once. And somehow I had to get that into something that made sense. And I feel like I did. I feel pleased with the book at this point. I also very, very glad that I'm done with it. I was worn out when I did it. Anyway, so what I ended up doing, to make a long story short, was 4 chapters. And in each chapter, I wanted the book to be symmetrical. So each of the 4 sections has 4 chapters, 16 chapters total. Then it has a beginning, this book on the history of Iowa, and an ending, which is a chapter on, what is it? It's called a call to action, I think. And then within each of the 4 sections, the chapters are very similar. So the first 3 chapters talk about the science of the problems. For example, with water, which is the one I'm going to deal with the most, the chapters talk about water as recreational asset, water quality, and flooding in Iowa. With soils, it talks about degraded soils, soil erosion, intensification of agriculture. And then the 4th chapter in each of those sections is called A Vision for the Future. Because, again, we're coming up into tough times. Our kids, our grandkids are entering tough times environmentally, where the Earth's basic environmental services are going to be very challenged. And the only way that we're going to pass through this, hopefully to a good, maybe even a better life, I don't know, is by having hope and by having a vision. I like this idea. When I give talks, what I like to do in the final slide is to say, here's what it means to have a vision. And I show a picture of a road going across a landscape and petering out, because it goes behind a hill. And I say, you never have a vision that where you're going to see the end of it. You're never going to reach the vision that you have. But if you don't have a vision, you don't know the direction to follow. You're just amorphous. We can feel a lot of amorphous stuff in our country now, I think. And I think that's because we don't have a united vision for the future. But with environmental problems, I think we need to have that vision. And that's what I love to tell students. Vision and hope. Keep up vision and hope. Think about vision and hope, and you're going to get through everything just fine. And then action, as I said. So the vision for the future is the final chapter. And I really struggled to get what I think are excellent authors for those. And these authors just did a stellar job. I'm so pleased. One of them, it's interesting, is Lisa Schulte-Moore. I don't know if that name's familiar to you, but she's a professor at Iowa State. And while she was writing her vision for the future, she got a MacArthur Fellowship. Do you know what those are? Those are the Genius Scholarships. What are they? $500,000 to do anything you want. It was so neat that she got that, right when she was writing this chapter. And yeah, so she was great. And the other authors are equally very good. So There we go. Now we start the readings. The first reading is one more thing that I want to say. I wanted the book to be readable, and what I've learned through my writing is that reading science is usually pretty boring, except for the most dedicated of us. I hate to read books that are pure science. I can't make my way through them. But what we like to do is tell stories. I mean, we're bred to tell stories, right? I mean, we evolved sitting around the campfire and staying alive because our elders were telling stories, to the babies and to the older people. And that's how we learned everything to survive. So that's, I think, in our genes. And so what I said to all the authors was, okay, here's how you write your story, your chapter. You open it with a personal story, you close it with a personal story, and then at least 3 times during the chapter, you refer back to that personal story. Almost like a formula. If you want to put the science in there, you can put the science in there. We want the science in there, but it has to be carried forward, moved forward by personal stories. And I got going, and the sciences, for the most part, they did this very well. And most of them struggled. Most of us had never done this before, but they did it okay. But then I realized, well, they're telling the stories about the science, but the real stories about Iowa's environment are being told by the people who are doing them right now, the actors, right? The people, the farmers that are farming responsibly, the woman that had started put her whole farm into a wetland preserve, the person who started Project Aware, which is a river cleanup thing, the person who got arsenic out of Iowa's wells. These are actors. And I wanted to get that action, and I wanted to get their energy and hope in it, so that we have the 4 sections, four fingers, and between each of these 4 chapters is an essay. The chapters are fairly long, but the essays are short, and they're told by the actors. So, for example, and they're all called a personal story. One is Farming for the Future, a personal story. Working with Mother Earth, a personal story. Farming My Values, a personal story. Arsenic in the Well, a personal story. Conserving the Family Farm, a personal story. And these people were very, these guys, especially the farmers, were saying, I don't know how to write this stuff. I don't know it. And, I really had to work with it. And a lot of them came up with really beautiful personal stories. I felt like it was a privilege to get to know them through their work. And I grew to very fond of many of my authors, especially those who put their hearts into the work. So what I'd like to do is all of my writings showcase that telling of personal stories, but I'd like to start with the beginning of the book, which is my personal story, the genesis of our problems, and read the first few paragraphs of my essay called Iowa's Life and Land, A Brief History by Cornelia Mutel. That's me. Okay, in the mid-1800s, my ancestors left their homes in Europe's German Confederation to settle in America's Midwestern wilderness. Family legend places my mother's great-grandmother trekking alone several miles down a woodland trail to the land office, where she filed the family's farmland claim. It's said that she sang the entire way to ward off any threats of danger and to still her soul. I love the image of a woman walking fearlessly through my primeval oak woodlands, seeking protection with song. Just as I love my family's tales of the newly arrived clan, assembling half-buried stick structures on hillsides to repel the howling wolves. But I questioned the story's veracity. What self-respecting family would scrape together the fees to board ship for America, only to send its daughter alone into danger? I also questioned my ancestors' premise that they laid claim to vacant wilderness During their struggles for survival, didn't they recognize that other people had occupied that land for thousands of years? Did they question, as they cleared the trees, what would happen to the native animals and plants that then thrived there? Or consider that each action has a cost, each taking a giving. Each problem solved spins new quandaries to be confronted. Or are these questions to be considered only in hindsight? The story of Iowa's land transformation and the disappearance of our prairie wilderness can be told from many perspectives. For example, its economic costs and benefits, cultural and technological evolution, or the fate of the displaced. My particular story focuses on environmental gains and losses of replacing Iowa's complex prairies with farms modeled after those in Eastern Europe and the Eastern United States, some of which have evolved in today's industrialized operations. I focus on agriculture. How could I do otherwise when agriculture claimed vast expanses of the richest topsoil on earth, soil from which newly imported seeds emerged even before the ancient prairies had completely disappeared? Iowa was, from the start, an agricultural state. Even though this landscape benefited its arrivals, doing so initiated a cascade of unintended consequences that unraveled the land's functional integrity, stability, and sustainability. With the first cut of the plow through Iowa's deep prairie roots, the landscape's native functions, which had ensured vibrant life and abundance, started to fade. This was the genesis of the environmental problems that today demand our attention. But today's environmental dilemmas need not prevail. We Iowans are capable of acting wisely and with conviction, of changing direction and healing the natural and agricultural worlds that survive and sustain us. How might we do so? Perhaps understanding where we come from and where we are today will help. This is my hope. This is my story. And then the chapter goes on to just talk about how Iowa developed. So my next reading is going to be one of these essays, and this is I told you I was so fond of many of the authors that I got to know. I didn't know them at the time. I had to really reach out and ask people who asked people who asked people to find the authors that were right for what I wanted them to do. And this is one of the personal essays. Again, these were included to make the book appealing and to make it more readable. They're the action parts of the chapters. I think the book would be very narrow if we didn't have the stories of regular everyday Iowans. So this is by a farmer, Seth Watkins, he's the one who wrote the chapter, Working with Mother Earth. Is anybody familiar with Seth Watkins? Does anybody know that name? He is a farmer, a cattle farmer in Western Iowa. His tragic story, and I think I can say, it's okay to say this because he's shared this on TED Talks. He has had some family tragedies because of farm pollution of his groundwater, of his well. And with 2 of his 3 children had severe results of the agricultural chemicals in his well water. And he's risen from that to become an activist, both to farm better and to talk about our need for taking care of our natural resources. And I've never met him in person. I'm looking forward to it, but I have a great admiration for him. So here's his story. And you can get from the beginning, you can get the first sentence, my name is Seth Watkins. It's a much different tone than my kind of drawn out long, maybe too long sentences. He's right to the point. Let me say that all my readings, I've taken sections and I've cut out chunks of them. So if they feel a little disjunct, that's because I wanted to condense these into something a little bit shorter. My name is Seth Watkins. I'm a 4th generation in my family to care for Pinhook Farm, which was established by my great-grandfather in 1848. My 3,000-acre farm's primary revenue comes from approximately 600 beef cows, their calves, and yearly cattle that graze our pastures. This is the most appropriate use of my farm's rolling land, which is vulnerable to erosion. Farmers often feel intense pressure to maximize production. The fact that we're called producers instead of farmers says a lot. The truth is that until the blizzard of 1998, I farmed with a total focus on production. I love that. You know, he just gets out there and he says, you know, I really screwed it up before I came back to what was right. I love his openness and the willingness to just say that. My attitude was that modern technology and determination could conquer anything Mother Nature threw in my way. I noticed things that bothered me, like muddy streams and diminishing numbers of birds and wildflowers on our land, but it was easier to ignore those problems when I focused on productivity. One farming practice that had always concerned me was having my cows calve in February and early March. Industry wisdom was that getting the calves out early, by doing that, I could dedicate my labor to planting corn in April, and I'd have larger calves to sell in the fall. However, seeing a muddy, shivering baby calf on a snowy March day never looked good to me. The 1998 blizzard that transformed my farming struck on March 11th in the middle of the calving season. Within hours, the temperature dropped from 60 degrees to below zero, with 15 inches of snow and sustained winds of 40 miles per hour. For 3 days, I worked around the clock, sheltering cows and calves. This miserable experience was the inspiration I needed to ask the most important question of my career. Why was I working against Mother Nature? What I really wanted was clean water, healthy soil, happy cows. If the experts were right and I went broke because of my new approach, so be it. I'd had enough. My first change was moving my calving season from February to April. This small shift made wonderful things happen. The warmer April weather reduced my costs for fuel, equipment, and feed, allowing the cows to express their natural instincts by calving on warm green pastures, reduce their stress, and increase their productivity. Instead of going broke, I found that I had happy, healthy cows and a more profitable farm. And I had kickstarted a beautiful relationship with Mother Nature. Focusing on stewardship and following nature's lead have made my farm more sustainable, profitable, and ecologically sound. It is also becoming more socially responsible. I feel that my farm is helping to fight the increased poverty in our rural communities with their declining and aging populations and support public health issues associated with drinking water contaminated by farm chemicals. Farming with nature regenerates and protects natural resources we all depend upon, and I trust that it will give my children a future filled with abundance, opportunity, and hope. Isn't that nice? I just love that. That, you know, that Frank saying, you know, guys, I saw the light. Here I am. You know, it was good. Let me ask you, how is this? Just give me a thumbs. Is this okay? The reading okay? Yeah. Are you hearing it okay? Linda said okay. Somebody, oh, good. Hi, thank you. And good luck with your you had some cancer tests done today, did you? I can't hear you. You're muted. She's muted. Anyway, good luck to you. Good luck to you. Okay.
Connie, unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself to answer. There you go.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's no big deal. Just one of those things you have to go through, but I look pretty hideous right now. So that's all.
Good for you for catching it and getting on top of it.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. So now what I want to do now is I picked one of the 4 sections, and I picked the water section because I think that that's the most accessible. It's the easiest. You know, climate change it still is kind of hard for a lot. It's really complex, so I didn't want to go there. Soils, people are becoming more sensitive about our soil problems, but I thought, we all know that water is a big thing in Iowa, and we need to do it a little bit better. So I'm going to read you a little bit from I wrote an introduction to each section, kind of pointing the readers in the right direction. And then I'm going to read you parts of one of the personal essays, which is like the one I just read, but this one pertains to water. And then I'm going to read you parts of the vision for the future chapter for the section. So my introduction. Again, if you're thinking in terms of writing, notice how all of these start with personal stories, because I feel that's the only way we can get people to pay attention. Many of my fondest memories involve water, paddling through the boundary waters, splashing in Lake Michigan, teaching our kids to swim, delighting when they ran outside into wild, windy downpours, quietly kayaking through pond lilies as I watched the sun rise over a marsh. Water is a resource that we cannot ignore. From early morning's first refreshing mouthful to our nighttime shower, Earth's most essential fluid circulates through our daily lives and calls for our attention. It's also key to human health and survival. Our body is almost 2/3 water, which transports nutrients, helps lubricate our joints, flushes out our waste products, and assists with balancing our internal temperature. I've read that humans can live 30 to 40 days without food, but only 3 days without water. Water tends other organisms in similar ways, and water's quality and flow shape habitats, and determine whether native plants and animals flourish or fail. Without water, nature as we know it would not exist. However vital water is to life on Earth, its influence is shaped by circumstances. Water takes what it is given and returns life or death, blessing or curse. Feed water into living porous soil, and you get prairie flowers and crystalline rivers. Feed water onto dead compacted soil, and you get floods and runoff thick with chocolate brown sediment. Feed water into an overheated atmosphere, and you get record rainfalls and monster storms. So, and then I go to talk a little bit more about water, and then give a short summary of each of the 4 chapters and 3 essays. But another thing to notice, and I tried to work this into the book wherever I could, the idea of everything being interconnected, right? Like, water is connected to everything else. The plowing of the prairie is connected to all of our problems. Just to really get those connection ideas going. So this next, this is one of the personal essays. Let me see if I'm forgetting anything here. Yeah, I don't think so. Was by Brian Sonnen. Brian is the person who, and I think he was in his 20s, started Iowa Project Aware. Just raise your name. Do you guys know what Project Aware is? Have you heard? It's a water cleanup, and he modeled it after there's a person, Chad, I don't know how to say his last name. I don't know how to say it. Chad, who started a big water cleanup on the Mississippi River, which has become very, very well known across the country. In fact, I think he got a MacArthur Fellowship also for his work. But Brian, as a young guy, just new employee at the DNR, went to Chad's river cleanup and got so turned on about it that he came back to start one at Iowa. And the river cleanup is just taking people out on a river for a day, a week. Iowa Project Aware is a week-long river cleanup. You put people into canoes, and 2 people into a canoe, and you send them on a predefined section of a river, and you say, pick up any junk that you find. And, there are all sorts of fun. If you look on the web, you can maybe find it, but fun pictures of, 2 canoes finding a hole from a car that they brought back to be recycled, perched on top of the 2 canoes. They're paddling really fast to get it to shore. and stuff like that. And it's just become kind of like Ragbri. Ragbri is a party on bicycles, and this is a party on the water. But people doing a project, a public, a public project. Publicly in it. So Brian talks a little bit about starting Project Aware. The idea for Iowa Project Aware, and that aware is all in caps. Let me see if I have it here. It stands for maybe I can't find it here, but each letter stands for something. A watershed experience, and I don't know what the A and R are, but anyway. The idea for Project Aware took root at a routine staff meeting at the DNR, Department of Natural Resources. And I can't tell you what was on the agenda that day, but when we turned to volunteer recruitment, I had my eureka moment. He was actually hired to be the DNR's volunteer coordinator. I asked the simple question, could we do a river cleanup? My life and the lives of countless other volunteers were changed forever when my boss said, sure, what do you have in mind? My rationale was simple. My job was to engage volunteers in water quality monitoring. Iowa has nearly 72,000 miles of rivers and streams, and while I hadn't seen them all, I had never been to one without seeing trash. I had also coordinated water quality training sessions, and I knew that when you talked about data, people fell asleep. But in contrast, if you gave people a net and put them on a stream to find bugs, they came alive. My conclusion, the best way to help people care about water quality is to get them into the water. A river cleanup was a perfect way to get people involved. Let's see. Iowa Project Aware got its name from what I wanted it to be. Not just a cleanup, but an immersive journey that focuses on action, education, and adventure. During the event, participants paddle canoes and search for river and riverbank trash. They camp in local campgrounds along the way and communities at night. Throughout the week, they also attend educational programs emphasizing local history, culture, and nature. And the beautiful thing is that the experience is contagious. Over the past 2 decades, there has been a large surge in local river cleanups across the state, creating what some people have termed a cleanup culture. Not content with just attending Project Aware, many volunteers seek out similar opportunities throughout the year, whether they participate in river cleanups or at other events. Iowa Project Aware volunteers tend to be leaders in their communities, motivating and inspiring others through their actions. Picking up trash, of course, won't solve Iowa's water quality problems, but it does get people involved. It brings people together in a way that encourages teamwork, builds camaraderie, and empowers meaningful change. River cleanups are like a gateway drug for cooperative environmental activism. It's so easy to get frustrated, disappointed, and discouraged about environmental issues. There are so many things that are bad and getting worse. Despite this, there is so much good on this planet, so many reasons for hope and optimism. There's always at least one thing that you can do. Start with that. And don't forget to work together, because the greatest resource we have is each other. One person can inspire change, but it takes a community to make things happen. So you can see how the authors, I thought that they did a nice job of always putting in the hope and the positive attitude. So does anybody, I'm going to start this thing, the chapter, the vision for Iowa's future, reading next. And I said, this is the longest reading I'm doing. Does anybody want to make any comments or have any questions at this point? Anything at all is welcome. you're good with just the reading? Thumbs up,
Yes.
okay? Yes, perfect, okay. So this is the chapter written by Larry Weber. Larry is the former, well, he's actually the director now of the hydraulics lab on campus, the university campus. It's called the Iowa Institute of Hydraulic Research. And he has been instrumental in trying to push for water's quality in many, many ways across the state. So his chapter is called Water-Centered Land Management, a Vision for the Future. Again, he starts with the personal story of growing up on his farm. Every day as a boy, I would walk out through the farm fields in the late afternoon to bring home our dairy cows. And if I'm honest, I almost always managed to sneak in a little fun. A shallow creek flowed through the pasture where the cattle grazed. It drew me like a flower draws a bee. Year round the creek, whose personality changed with each season, was my favorite place to play. I remember crouching in the sand and gravel bars, watching minnows and water bugs flit through the clear water. Frogs, minnows, muskrats, great blue herons, and more. The diversity of the creatures I saw fascinated me. I could have spent hours at the creek on those late afternoon walks if I hadn't known I was expected to get the cattle home with the cows promptly at milking time. I loved observing how the water moved through the creek bed, building and rearranging the sandbars in an endless process. At the creek, I learned the basics of river hydraulics, the field that would eventually be the foundation of my professional career. My fascination with this area of study carried me to the University of Iowa, where I am now a professor of civil and environmental engineering. In this role, I teach and conduct research in water resource engineering. Farming in Iowa has been transformed since my boyhood in the 1970s. The farm crisis of the 1980s led to fewer and larger farms and a more corporate approach to agriculture. Too often, conservation has taken a back seat to the seeming progress of industrialized agriculture. The modernization and intensification of agriculture have also brought serious consequences. In the frenzy to plant more corn during the ethanol boom, farmers plowed under the fence row habitat that had sustained native plants and wildlife and safeguarded the water's flow for generations. Excessive use of chemical fertilizers is now pervasive, polluting waterways and leading to toxic algae blooms. Cattle, hogs, and poultry grown in CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations, have resulted in a glut of animal manure being applied to our land twice a year. And agriculture, as it is practiced today, has serious impacts on water runoff. Water races off the tiled landscape, carrying with it the excess nitrate that's put on to fertilize our yields, increased downstream flooding, and further degradation of our water quality. Climate change has also aggravated many of these problems. What I have described is a landscape badly out of balance. I propose a new water-centered vision for Iowa. It's a vision in which water becomes a commons, something of great value that belongs to all of us, a resource that we actively protect and manage for our collective good. By managing and protecting our water, we would begin to change the mindset of Iowans, encouraging everyone to safeguard and preserve all our natural resources. My vision includes allowing our floodplains to remain natural, untilled, and undeveloped in both rural and urban landscapes, thus giving rivers room to flood. These floodplains would also provide space for trails, parks, hunting, outdoor recreation, wildlife, and the like. My vision includes net zero runoff for all future developments in all locations. This can be done if new construction includes ponds, wetlands, and other water holding features. It's a vision-based, just a minute. Okay, I missed a sentence somehow here. But anyway, he says to do this, to get this vision, we need 4 things. First, we need more conservation on private lands, resulting in flood reduction and improved water quality. Second, reduced row crop production in the most recurrent floodplains. Third, increased biological and agricultural diversity across the landscape, transitioning from our nearly ubiquitous 2-crop monoculture to a system with greater prevalence of small grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and open grazing. And fourth, we should work toward de-intensification of agriculture on Iowa's most vulnerable landforms, such as the Luss Hills and northeastern Iowa. Meanwhile, intensification of agriculture might continue on Iowa's most productive row crop lands, preferably following the tenets of regenerative agriculture. And he talks about how we need farm policies to instill that, those changes. My vision is not a pipe dream. From 2016 to 2022, I led a project focused on building and implementing a new vision, the Iowa watershed approach. As its leader, I saw how this approach could transform a watershed for the betterment of all. This was a statewide watershed demonstration program designed to slow down the flow of water through the landscape by strategically building farm ponds, wetlands, terraces, and grassed waterways, and implementing perennial cover and other conservation practices. In the process, we restored some of Iowa's natural resiliency to heavy rainfall while improving water quality, creating wildlife habitat, and preparing the land for intensifying climate change. He goes on to describe his proposal in much greater detail. For a couple pages. The partners and organizers of the Iowa watershed approach had a vision. People got it and they bought into it. We now need the political will to implement funding of the programs that voters have already indicated they support, and to adopt environmental standards to fulfill the vision. And let me say, this was interesting because this was all written, I guess, during the election, trying to remember. But also, once Biden got in and passed that infrastructure bill, the infrastructure bill is actually funding a lot of the things that are supported in this book. You know, a lot of the regenerative ag, for example, is being funded by that bill. So it's a little bit exciting, I think. And then at the very end, Larry goes back to his personal story and winds it up. Although I am grown now, the boy who would spend all day playing in the creek still lives within me. Deep down, I am still fascinated by the flow of water through a creek and the ecosystem that grows up around it. Perhaps that's what inspired me and my wife, Michelle, to purchase 100 acres of land near our home in Iowa City. Our efforts here are focused on improving the water quality of the creek, knowing that it flows on to Iowa into the Iowa River and then to the Mississippi, and that through it we can have a small positive effect on the larger watershed. The work is both my joy and my responsibility. All Iowans bear the responsibility to care for the land and to rectify the mistakes of the past. We continue to move forward with hope and determination, knowing that future generations depend on the work we do today. And every now and then, when I'm working on the property, I look up and realize that hours have slipped by as if they were just a moment. My relationship with this place and its soil, its growing things, and especially its water, remains as primal and intimate as when I was a boy. My wish for Iowa is that each of us could reestablish this most important relationship with the natural world, which has given us so much and asks only to be respected and cared for in return. So we're getting close to the ending now. I just have two more much shorter readings. So I said that I really didn't know until the book was at least 2/3 done. What the book was about and what was its, what was I really trying to push, and not push, but to what did I have to pull all these different chapters, a huge diversity of chapters into a unit. And so I'm going to do two readings. One is of a dream that I had about the book, which helped me define the theme. And the dream didn't really have, when you're writing something, you don't always have to tell the exact truth. So the dream didn't happen exactly the way it did, but this was an emerging vision of the interactions that I had. And I realized those, as I said before, those interactions are what would be the glue for the book. And that did come across as through dreams and through kind of subconscious work over several nights. Yeah, so I have this reading that talks a little bit about the formation of my final vision for the book. And then, of course, once you get that defined, then you have to go back through all the chapters that have been already almost completed, and then just add little bits here and there, but that's okay. And the second one is a little bit from the closing by another professor at the university. So these are, again, the bookends of the thing. My introduction at the beginning, talking about writing the book, and then the call to action at the very end. So, okay. So first I talk in this little bit, this is just a short writing, but I talk first about the theme. It's so simple once you realize it. It's so simple, it's embarrassing. It wasn't obvious, but it took me a long time to get a hold of this. The book was half about agriculture, because agriculture is the thing that came in and completely transformed Iowa. And it's half about the natural world that has been transformed by agriculture. And, nature aficionados would like more nature. Agriculture aficionados would like more agriculture, maybe, although I don't know how much more they could have here in Iowa than they have now. But what I realized after many months of working on it, the theme was obviously, here we have these two disparate entities, and the book is about bringing them together. How can they work together to solve the problems of the future? And what I realized is, and you'll get this in this next reading, is that the problems, just what they talk about, something, again, this is something I wouldn't say if I weren't talking at Marvelous of a religious talk. It's basically, the book is about how everything's interacting, everything is intertwined and works together, and nothing is separate from the whole. And that is the basis of my field of training, ecology. Again, that's pretty obvious. But I think it's also the basis of our faith, isn't it? I mean, why do we, what do we do if we pray to Jesus? We don't say, make me the best individual sports player in the world. We say, help us to be one with others so that we can better live your mission. And so, I mean, it was interesting how this all came together. Anyway, here's my beginning, where I talked about the formation of the theme. I knew that for many Iowans, I'm talking about how I wrote the book again at the very beginning. For many Iowans, the relationship between nature and agriculture remains fraught with dissension. Agriculture, especially Iowa's industrial scale commodity agriculture, appears to emphasize productivity and profitability without considering nature. Environmentalists may appear to naively make unreasonable demands, that limit a farmer's financial survival. I wanted this book to propose a middle ground. Chapter authors met the challenge of describing proposals and movements capable of benefiting both agriculture and nature, such as the regenerative agricultural movement. That's talked a lot about in the soils chapter. Such efforts are becoming more visible. This book shows a bridge that connects nature to agricultural systems in order to move Iowa's land and water toward environmental health. Its authors outline multiple ways for agriculture to reincorporate biological diversity and its self-generated resilience into farming systems. This merging of biodiversity and agriculture have become the overriding theme that unites the book's chapters, essays, and recommendation. My hope is that its many stories of environmental quandaries and accomplishments will stimulate hope and action, and perhaps even a change of heart, leading all of us to work together toward a more positive future. And now, before closing, one final story about preparing this book. While the project was in its youth, while direction and substance were still searching for shape, I woke early one morning from a hazy dream about circles. In my mind's eye, numerous small circles looped together to form bigger circles, those stringing together into a network of circular interconnections. I quickly realized that this was a picture of my book's subject matter. Each problem discussed herein interacts with and often intensifies the other problems. The repeated plowing and degradation of soils create runoff that pollutes the water. The upended organic matter of our prairie soils releases carbon dioxide emissions that exacerbate climate change. Around and around we go. But as I mentally played with this complex conglomeration, I realized that these interactions also created solutions, because each time we address one problem, we also help to solve other problems. When we lower carbon dioxide emissions, we lessen climate change's enhancement of flooding. By holding eroding soils in place, we reduce water pollution and enhance soil health. In this way, we can multiply the results of our efforts. We all, in our daily lives, can nudge Iowa toward greater environmental health. And boy, I hope that theme came through in the book. I feel that so strongly. Return one last time to my early morning reveries. As the sun rose outside my bedroom window and the wind circles spun around in my head, they became a vision of my emerging book's structure and import. The book's many chapters became connected circles of ideal nature, degraded by a problem for which realistic solutions were suggested. The 4 book sections became the same, circle stories of problems described and resolved, paradise lost and regained. And the book as a whole spoke of today's interconnected environmental problems, awaiting resolution by returning biodiversity and its healing processes to Iowa's land. As I lay there, I thought of the myriad actions favoring environmental integrity that are waiting to be taken by each of us, be we teacher or student, parent or child, scientist or science skeptic, legislator or activist. Each action, be it large or small, top down or bottom up, is needed for us to move forward successfully. Together, those actions can help achieve a more sustainable and resilient future. And so I offer the circle story to you, the book's readers. Your future, my future, Iowa's future, are yet to be determined. They lie in the hands of each one of us. How do we embrace this truth? By learning about the problems and living the solutions. Doing so, we can each begin one day, 1 year, 1 paragraph at a time to do the right thing for our land and for our collective future. Turn the page. Let this book be your beginning. So that's my introduction. And here is my friend, Jerry Schnorr's closing, a call to action. So Jerry is interesting. He was one of the co-founders at the University of Iowa of the Climate Change Center, CGRIR. He has been talking and lecturing for 30 years now, since 32, almost 33 years, since 1990, about the need to address climate change. And I just admire him because he still is, so he's just doing it. Sometimes he gets a little bit skeptical, but he just keeps teaching students. He keeps smiling, he keeps laughing, he keeps just moving and spinning out ways to do things better. And he's a very enthusiastic person, and I think his enthusiasm for action come through in this closing chapter. This is the very closing of the book. What about the loss of, what about, he goes through much of the chapters, much of his chapter here, it's just a short chapter, talking about the other authors, and he cites various other authors and their ideas. So he's going to cite Tom Rosberg here, who wrote a chapter for the biodiversity section. What about the loss of native biodiversity? Tom Rosberg proposes a two-part solution, implementing regenerative agricultural practices on row crop farms and restoring healthier native biodiversity on Iowa's non-farmed land and marginal farmland. Our needs cannot usurp nature's or the environment's needs. In Tom's chapter, I hear echoes of Aldo Leopold's land ethic. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. To many, preventing the continued extinction of Earth's wondrously diverse plants and animals is an overriding priority because of extinction's profound and irreversible implications. As renowned biologist E.O. Wilson wrote, when we debase the global environment and extinguish the variety of life, we are dismantling a support system that is too complex, too complex to understand, let alone replace in the foreseeable future. According to Wilson, protecting half of the land and half of the oceans for nature by 2050 could save about 85% of Earth's biodiversity, a small price to pay for the preservation of countless species, including humans. In Half Earth, Wilson identifies bird flyways, marine sanctuaries, ecosystem gradients, and connects them to a global network. These nature corridors can connect larger biodiversity restorations on the landscape. Iowa's biodiversity improvements outlined in this book will fit nicely into the mosaic of longer natural corridors promoted by Wilson. Tom Rosberg admits to being an unrepentant biophiliac. Biophilia, a term coined by E.O. Wilson, is defined in the dictionary as a hypothetical human tendency to interact or be closely associated with other forms of life in nature, a desire or tendency to commune with nature. I suspect that Rosberg is in good company with many of the authors of this book, myself included. Many of us who have been observing Earth's changes and challenges sense that our planet's native communities and processes are in some way sacred, and feel that this sense of the sacred has not been lost. Biophilia ardently abounds in so many people that this humble call to action, I pray, will fall on fertile ground. We yearn for a more restorative, resilient relationship with the natural world and landscape. Such yearnings and our roots run deep. Rene Dubos, who is credited with the phrase, think globally, act locally, also wrote of our deep attraction to the natural environment and our need for a sense of place. Today, I picture myself returning once more to my roots at Duck Creek. This is how he opened the chapter. He described about how when he was a little kid, he played at Duck Creek in Davenport. Yes, the creek has been straightened and has lost much of its natural character, but I would be remiss if I ignored the treasures still remaining. 2 Baltimore orioles fly over its banks. Then a great blue heron greets me as if to say, don't despair, don't give up. Life still abounds and opportunities still remain for nature's healing, restoration, regeneration, and rebirth. To me, that's the transformative energy of this inspiring volume. A rebirth has begun in small patches of restored native prairie, no-tilled land, riparian zone plantings, etc. And these are documented in this book, but we must magnify and multiply that effort. Our call to action, Iowas have a unique opportunity and an obligation to succeed with regenerative agriculture, to slow and infiltrate our rainwater, to incorporate atmospheric carbon into our soil, to enhance our landscape's native biodiversity, and to export all that we learn to our global community. This, I feel, is our collective vision for the future. So I think that's the end. Yeah, and again, just the need to, I think whenever we talk with, our kids, our grandkids, our colleagues, or whatever, we people who understand nature's needs and nature's problems just need to always remember to work to struggle and work toward being hopeful and encourage visions to lead us to a better future, and to encourage those young people who are going to carry us to the future, whatever it contains. So that's all I have. Thanks for sitting here for so long. You're probably getting tired of sitting, but yeah. Anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions or whatever, if anybody has any.
Connie, I just want to congratulate you on this book. It's incredible, the research that you went into it and all of the books that you've written. So thank you for doing that. How do we get more people interested in this? I mean, everywhere you look and everything you hear, climate change is such an important issue and it affects every single one of us. But how do we get, we've got 6 people who signed up, 5 people who signed up for tonight, which is wonderful. I'm happy everybody's here, but I think we should have had a couple hundred people just concerned about this. So
Yeah.
what can we do at the Prairie to make this more, more urgent, I guess, to people?
I guess probably through a lifetime of living this stuff, I've maybe just as self-preservation, I've stopped quantifying my effect. I don't think that that doesn't lead to a good night's sleep. If I try to quantify, I do the same thing. My neighbor just told me she bought a brand new car, and I wanted to say, oh, was it electric or was it hybrid? But I didn't, because I know there was no chance, that she would have thought of that. And what do we do? I think that's maybe our Christian calling too. It's what we do. At least that's what I think of partly as a Christian calling. We do what we can. We do the best we can. We do it prayerfully and with hope. And then we let go of it. We just say, okay, I've done it. Your turn, God, you take over. I'm exhausted. I think if we quantify, it is frustrating. I'm not saying it's not frustrating. But I don't know what else to say beyond that. Lori, I think you've done a super job, and of the number of classes and things that you've put together are wonderful. And so many of them are just really sound wonderful. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
keep doing what you're doing. That's all that we can do.
Well, thank you very much. Let me give
Yeah,
Excuse
maybe
me?
other people have thoughts on, other people, not, including sometimes our kids, our neighbors, all sorts of people, our spouses, maybe.
I
do we think-
remember having a conversation a while ago with a woman who hadn't realized that our particular part of the earth had been going through a very bad drought situation. She was so totally insulated from what was happening with the weather in our location that it was totally news to her. And I think the lack of being part of nature and the drive in our society that we're supposed to be consumers, those are both really destructive things.
I totally agree. And destructive to the people too.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, I mean. More thoughts? Positive, negative?
I'm really looking forward to reading the book. The chronology, the history, I think is in the first chapter of how Iowa
Yeah.
farmland has evolved. I'm really looking forward to reading that. And Larry
thank you.
Weber's piece on water-centered land management is something I look forward to reading.
Yeah,
I own a farm in southeast Iowa, just northeast of Fairfield, and it's been in the family for 100 years by 1930, and we've had a farmer farm it for us. Good Catholic family, and he works really hard. He drives a semi to in between farming, and he has some cattle. But if we even approach the conversation around regenerative farming, it really becomes a contentious conversation, and he'd much rather talk about the Catholic Church's position on abortion than land management and regenerative agriculture. And so I don't know how to have that conversation. I'm hoping the book is going to give me some new ideas. One last thing, where he and I have found common ground, we're both of our great grandparents are buried in the same cemetery in a little town called Polishville, which is south of Brighton, Iowa. And there's a nice museum there and community center. And so he's the president and I'm the vice president, and our 140th anniversary of the church is coming up next year. And Bishop Zinkula has agreed to come down and say a polka mass for us.
Oh, wow.
So I'm hoping the bishop will be able to create some opening for a deeper conversation around regenerative farming as well.
That sounds good. Let me tell you something. Oftentimes people have said to me, well, do you grow up on a farm? And I say no. And they say, well, you don't know what you're talking about then. I don't know if they're right or not. They probably have a lot of veracity in their statement, but I have talked to a lot of farming people, and I think 6 of the essays are by farmers. One of them is right near Fairfield, Francis Ticky. Do you know him?
I do know him.
Yeah.
Yes. I know of him. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
I can't say his name in front of my farmer though, because he's a communist and all these other things.
but here is what
But I know Francis. Yes.
Yeah. Here is what Gene Tockley told me. Gene Tockley is a professor at Iowa State, now retired, but he grew up on a farm in far north Iowa. And I think the farm is still in the family, and very much a farmer, as is Larry Weber, as you could tell.
Yeah.
But Jean had started the Climate Science Center at Iowa State. And when I was starting to work on my climate change book, that was about a decade ago, one of the first things I did was sat down and to talk to him and said, well, what do you write and how do you get this to appeal to farmers and the like? And he said, well, what I've learned is that farmers won't listen to the word climate change, but they will listen to what's happening to the earth. And what I do when I go out, because he does a lot of public speaking, or he used to anyway, and I say, have you guys noticed that you're putting in more tiles now? It seems to be getting wetter now. And they all, and say, yeah. And then it's getting warmer. We're having to use fungicides more because of the moisture and the heat. Yeah, more toxicality. Yeah, all those things. And he says, I get to the end of the talk and they say, you know, all of the things that we've been talking about, all of those were caused by climate change. And somehow and he's a very unassuming, very mild-mannered man, but he said that hooks him.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's helpful. Art Cullen was in Davenport last week, I think, and
Okay.
at a River Action conference, and he talks about farming. The way we're doing farming will no longer exist south of Highway 30 by 2050, and I'm just, I haven't had that conversation with my farmer yet, but I mean, he's very committed to keeping this family farm going. He's got a couple of kids that, you know, he wants to pass the farm on to. But if Art is right in all the studies that Art is referring to, I mean, it will be very difficult to farm the same way that we're farming today.
Because of the climate change, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And the other
Well, that's
thing,
very good, helpful about, I mean, we've been putting tiling in the last few years for exactly that reason. And I don't know about the fungicide that he's using, but that tiling is expensive. It's $1,000 an acre, and
wow.
it's
Wow.
crazy.
Wow. Well, here's another, I mean, a lot of times I find that people don't care about statistics, but I'm married to a physicist. So, you know, my husband says, well, I live by numbers. So, but the precipitation, the average annual precipitation, I can't remember if it's the last 20 or 30 years, has increased from 32 inches a year to between 36 and 37 inches per year. I mean, that's incredible. That's the average annual precipitation. So it's a lot, and that moisture is coming up from the Gulf of Mexico because the Gulf is warmer, so it's evaporating more. So, you know, I mean, it's all tied together. And then the winds
But then
are
we
strong.
have the Mississippi drying up. I mean, we have all these things that seem to contradict each other, you know.
They swing back and forth. But what's true with what you generally say is climate change pushes the extremes.
Extreme.
It
Yeah,
makes the drought drier and the floods more frequent
more
and
severe.
yeah, pushing the extremes. And that's, you know, I think that's, if you can get people to listen, it kind of, you know, you say, well, we're putting more heat in the atmosphere. And if you think about heat, what does it do? It boils water, right? Heat is chaos. Heat is energy. And we're putting more energy into the atmosphere. And why do we have, you know, where I live here near Iowa City, it's almost always this really strong wind. We didn't
Well,
used to
I'm
have.
going to come get you the next time I go down there. You and I can,
Okay. Well,
walk
I
in
don't,
the woods.
I'm gonna let you handle him. Well, good for you, though. Good for
I
you. And
appreciate it, and I can't wait to get the book. December, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you so
for coming
much.
in. Yeah. Okay.
I wanted to say something. Last night, I watched about an hour and 3/4 of Jefferson County. It's a farm organization that is trying to encourage farmers to use more sustainable practices. And they had 2 farmers on the whole show. One was from Indiana, a young man, and the other one was an older gentleman from Georgia who have completely changed their way,
Hmm.
kind of going back to how our parents raised the animals out on the grass, moving them all the time, you know, so that they don't suffer from not having fresh grass to eat. It was really an extremely interesting. There was so much information, it was overwhelming, and I was wishing that our Secretary of Agriculture could have heard the whole talk, because I think he would have learned a lot of things that, you know, he's from Mount Pleasant. He's not a farm kid. He went to our church at St. Alphonsus, and he was the governor of Iowa, of course, but now he's being the secretary for the second time, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And he just doesn't, the way these men were describing how they've changed their farm practice. It's not always been easy. It's not always been really successful, but they've managed to stay ahead. One farms over 3,000 acres. He doesn't really farm. He's raising all sorts of animals, and he is actually has a both of them have something on their farm that they can process the animals. So it was very
Wow.
interesting. And if I ever get a chance to hear them again, I will let maybe Lori know she can.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember what was the forum, the Jefferson County Forum that sponsored the group?
It's J. I know it started with J and have an F, but I can't remember. Linda Rosenberg was the moderator
Huh.
of the program, and she interviewed Mr. Thick for a little bit, and someone else from the area of, because I'm originally from Fairfield.
Are you?
Yes, and
What's
so
your maiden name? What's your name?
Buch, B-U-C-H.
B-U-C-H.
Yes, yes.
Oh,
My brothers were all farmers around the area. But anyhow,
Huh.
I just felt that they gave so much information of how they have started this whole process and how it's been going. And it's really a very humane way of raising animals, but it also is keeping the soil in place.
Mhm.
And there was just so many benefits to what they're doing.
It makes sense. You know, when you put it together, it just makes sense. It just clicks. Was this a special program, or is it a regular program, or what?
I have no idea how I was notified. I can't tell you. It just popped up. I get these things and I don't know where they come from sometimes, because I belong to a lot of environmental groups that are
Hmm.
on the internet. But I especially wanted to watch this. Not that either of the guests were from the area, but because the subject, you know, there's so many CAFOs in the area, down in that area, Mount Pleasant and Fairfield. And this is one of the things they're really trying to change. We want a moratorium on the CAFOs.
You know, if you do relocate that, maybe you could send that link to Lori, and then Lori could send.
I will do that.
Yes.
I went online tonight hoping that they might have had a recording of it, but I didn't see that I could get a recording, but I definitely will send it to Lori so that she can let anyone know
I
about.
would love that if you could find it.
I will.
Okay.
I've got it on my um, telephone yet, so it's.
Okay.
That'd be great. And you know, that sounds a lot of do you know about Practical Farmers of Iowa?
Yes.
Yeah, so, because that sounds like what they're trying to promote too.
Yeah.
And there's a group up in Minnesota called Climate Land Leaders, and they're promoting farming to fight climate change. I mean, these groups are there and they're wonderful. You know,
One of the groups or organizations that promote and support is the this is what's happened to me sometimes. I can't think. Oh, SILT, you know about SILT.
yes.
They are one of the organizations that support this group.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, I know the woman that started that, and
Uh-huh.
she's just amazing. She's
Yes.
just amazing. Yeah. That's neat. That's very neat. Yeah. So Linda,
Did you say, I'm sorry, did you say that Tom Vilsack was a member of Saint Alphonsus?
Yes.
He
Uh-huh.
was?
He
Huh.
he was an orphan. He was a child that had been orphaned. So he lived out east. I can't remember exactly where, and he came to Iowa Wesleyan College and stayed, but he had no connection with farming whatsoever, except he has friends. In fact, I asked one of his friends, who is a friend of mine, who's a forester, if there's any way that if I could find this recording that I could send it to Tom Vilsack. I haven't heard from him.
Huh. I didn't know that about Tom Vilsack.
so let me give you a hint. I was hoping that Tom Vilsack would write a cover blurb for the book.
Oh,
I was told that it's very hard to get through. He's got, people who, all his advisors and stuff. And that if you can get to one of his advisors, that's the way to do it, but it's very hard to get a hold of him.
that's a shame.
It
These
is a shame.
men were not very complimentary about some of the things that our USDA have put
Yeah.
in practice. One of them even offered to be the Secretary of Agriculture. Of course, that didn't go very far.
Well, it is a shame too, because I know that so much money is going into agriculture now. Bills, right, with Biden's money.
Right. I guess there are some good things, but they had a whole list of things that would help this sort of an industry. In fact, the man from Georgia says that he employs over 300 people in his whole operation, and he calls it a destination place now, where
Wow.
people come to just see how this all works out. What he's doing on his I don't know if he called a farm because it's over 3,000 acres.
Mm.
Well, any other comments? Or thank you so much for sharing that. That was fascinating. Really appreciate it.
Very nice. Thank you.
Questions or comments by anybody?
Well, let me just put in a little plug. Our new calendar should be out in the next week or two. But if you go online now, you can look at our new calendar. On Saturday, April 1st, Connie is going to be giving a talk at the Prairie with Father Bud Grant. It's from 9 to 3, and it's come explore how nature shapes and supports all life and the ways humanity has reshaped the natural world. Learn to connect environmental concerns with your faith. So that's just a short description, but you can get online at our website, theprairieretreat.com, and look at more of that. But thank you so much, Connie, for agreeing to do this, and I hope that you'll all join us on April 1st.
Yeah. Thank you, Lori, for organizing it. And thank you. I always say I don't care, if there's 500, that's okay, but it's really fun when there's just a few people and you can make connections. And I just appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Having
The
you
conversations are better. Yeah, when they're small.
and see my friend Linda, we need, Linda and I used to talk about, getting together at the Prairie, and then COVID happened. So maybe we can make that happen now.
I hope so.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love that.
One-
Congratulations on the book.
Well,
yes,
thank you. Thank
One-
you. Thank you. I've
It was
enjoyed it.
real fascinating to hear the insight into your thoughts and the structure of it and its evolution. That I
Mhm.
enjoyed that much, as well as the environmental stuff.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, that's good. You know, it is interesting because you think all these things are kind of like, well, people just know how to do them, but I
Right.
don't. You know, I don't think many do. And yet it's kind of a faith journey. You know, you start out something and you think, okay, by the time you get to the, well, Linda's a lawyer. You probably did that too with your legal ideas. You know, by the time you get to the end, you know why you began, but sometimes it takes a long time to
Mm.
get to the conclusion. Anyway, thank you all. I've enjoyed being with you all tonight.
Good
Well,
luck.
thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
All right, thank you,
night.
Connie.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Linda.